I've always believed life is like architecture, measured, precise, built on foundations you trust won't crack. My name is Mark, and I designed my life like I design my buildings. Flawless, every detail in its place. Elena was the crown jewel in my masterpiece. Her smile, the curve of her laugh, the way her eyes reflected light. It all fit perfectly, like glass panels in a towering structure, clear and strong. We had it all. The sleek apartment overlooking the city, weekend getaways, dinner parties with polite laughter and expensive wine. People envied us, whispered about how perfect we were. Perfection is fragile, like glass. It started with something small, insignificant even, a misplaced earring. Not hers, a delicate, silver thing, lying quietly between the cushions of our sofa. Elena didn't wear silver. She said it didn't match her skin tone. I remember picking it up, turning it between my fingers, feeling its cold, sharp edge. That's how it begins, I suppose. A crack so thin you barely notice it. I asked her about it. She smiled, her face soft and unbothered, said it probably belonged to Anna, her friend who visited last week. I wanted to believe her. I did. But my mind, a mind trained to spot flaws, asymmetry, mistakes others overlook, refused to let it go. That night, while she slept beside me, breathing softly like nothing was wrong, I stared at the ceiling. The shadows danced across it, and for the first time in years, I felt them pressing down on me. I told myself not to be ridiculous, but the crack was already there. And once you see it, you can't unsee it. That was the beginning. The next morning felt different. Not in the way where you expect thunder after dark clouds. No, this was quieter, like the faint hum of electricity behind walls. You don't notice it until you're really listening. Elena moved around the kitchen, barefoot on the cold tiles, pouring coffee into the mug I bought her from that little shop in Florence. She smiled at me like nothing was wrong, like the world hadn't shifted under my feet the night before. I kissed her on the cheek before leaving for work. Her skin was warm, familiar, but something inside me recoiled. At the office, I tried to drown myself in blueprints and site plans, lines and angles where everything made sense. But my mind drifted back to the earring, back to her easy smile. There was no proof, just a feeling, but feelings have a way of gnawing at you, don't they? Like termites hidden inside polished wood. Days passed. I became an architect of doubt, constructing possibilities, drafting scenarios. The earring could have belonged to Anna. Maybe I was overthinking. But then there was her phone, always face down, always locked. Elena never used to care about privacy. She'd laugh at memes and show me without a second thought. Now, her thumb hovered just a second longer over the screen before she tucked it away. One evening, as she showered, I picked up her phone. I knew the passcode. Of course I did, I helped her set it up. But my hand hesitated, trembling slightly. I didn't unlock it. Not then. Instead, I stared at my reflection in the dark screen, seeing a man I didn't recognize. A man standing at the edge of something, afraid to fall. But cracks don't heal on their own. They spread. And I was about to fall. The mind is a dangerous architect when it starts to draft blueprints made of suspicion. Every glance, every delayed response, every muted laugh from the other room became bricks in a structure I couldn't ignore. I stopped sleeping. Not completely. Just enough to feel the weight of exhaustion pressing behind my eyes during board meetings, my fingers gripping pens like they were lifelines. But when I came home, the facade went back up. I smiled. I asked about her day. I kissed her goodnight. But inside, the foundation was crumbling. One evening, Elena told me she was meeting Anna again. They'd planned a spa day, she said, her voice light, casual, too casual. She kissed my cheek and left wearing a dress she never wore for brunches. I waited exactly 10 minutes before grabbing my keys. I didn't follow her at first. I just drove. Around the city, past the clean lines of buildings I'd helped design, structures that stood proud and unbothered, unlike me. My hands tightened on the steering wheel until my knuckles turned white. Eventually, I found myself near the hotel district, not somewhere she'd need to go for a spa day. And there she was, stepping out of a taxi. Alone.
No, Anna.
She entered a boutique hotel with glass doors that reflected the city lights, but all I could see was her silhouette disappearing inside. I didn't follow her in. Instead, I parked across the street and watched. An hour later, she emerged, her hair slightly tousled, her smile tucked away, like it belonged to someone else now. She didn't see me, but I saw everything I needed. That night, while she slept beside me again, I stared at the ceiling. The shadows were darker now, heavier, and the crack in my perfect life? It had spread. But I wasn't going to patch it. I was going to tear the whole thing down. The next morning, I made her breakfast. Just like always. Eggs, toast, coffee, black, no sugar. She smiled at me, the same smile she wore for years, the one I thought I knew. But now it felt like a mask. She told me about her spa day, sprinkled with details so precise they sounded rehearsed. I nodded, pretending to listen, every word carving deeper into the hollow space growing inside me. I didn't confront her. Not yet. Instead, I became an observer in my own life. Watching. Recording. I started noticing patterns, small things. Her sudden interest in texting late at night. The way she lingered in the shower. How she'd lock the bathroom door when she never used to. It wasn't about the act anymore. It was about the lie. The quiet betrayal woven into our daily routine, hidden beneath words like, I love you, and good night. One evening, while she was asleep, I finally unlocked her phone. The code hadn't changed. Felt almost insulting how easy it was. The messages weren't what I expected. No names saved under fake contacts. Just subtle conversations buried between normal chats. A photo of a wine glass. A simple, wish you were here. But the most painful thing wasn't the words. It was the familiarity. Inside jokes she never shared with me. Details about her day she never mentioned. I realized then it wasn't just physical. She'd given parts of herself to someone else, pieces I thought were mine alone. I closed the phone gently, placed it back on the nightstand, and looked at her sleeping face. She looked peaceful. But peace was about to become a distant memory. Because I wasn't just going to confront her. I was going to dismantle her, piece by piece. Revenge isn't about rage. It's about patience, precision. The same way I draft a building, calculating every angle, every weight-bearing point, was how I began to design her downfall. I didn't want to yell. I didn't want dramatic confrontations. No, that would be too easy, too temporary. I wanted something that would last, something that would echo in her mind long after I was done. I started small. I mirrored her lies, told her I had late meetings, business trips. I watched her face for signs of suspicion. Nothing. She was too wrapped up in her secret to notice mine. While she thought I was at work, I was following her. Watching from afar as she met him, always the same hotel, always the same routine. But I never got close enough to see his face. It wasn't about him, not yet. I needed to understand her. The why, the how. One day, curiosity outweighed control. I followed them inside, staying hidden, observing like an outsider peering into a life that wasn't mine anymore. They weren't careful, not really. Maybe they thought they were untouchable. But nothing is untouchable. Back home, I began collecting things. Screenshots of messages, photos from my phone. Not because I needed proof. No, this wasn't for anyone else. This was part of the plan, a file of betrayal neatly organized like a project folder. Then I found something unexpected. An appointment on her calendar. Not a hotel. Not a spa. A lawyer's office. Divorce papers, maybe? Or worse, plans to secure something before leaving. But she didn't know the blueprint was already changing. She thought she was in control. She had no idea she was just another structure I was about to demolish. The day of her appointment, I didn't follow her. Instead, I stayed home, in the silence of our apartment, walking through the spaces we shared. Every room felt different now, like a museum of staged memories. The framed photos, the souvenirs from trips, the little notes she'd left me over the years. All artifacts of a lie. I ended up in the study, where I kept my architectural drafts. But it wasn't my blueprints I was interested in. It was hers. Elena had a drawer she kept locked. She claimed it was for important documents, but I'd never cared enough to question it before. Now it was different. The lock wasn't complicated. A simple click and it opened. Inside, I expected paperwork, bills, contracts maybe. Instead, I found something else. A small black notebook. Leather-bound, worn around the edges. It wasn't a diary. It was worse. Inside were lists, names, dates, places, details scribbled in her handwriting, meetings, notes about conversations, observations about me. Not just me. About him. And another name. Anna. It wasn't just an affair. It was a game. A web of secrets woven so intricately that I'd been blind to the connections. Anna wasn't her alibi. She was part of it. I stared at the pages, my heart pounding. Not with sadness. Not even with rage. With clarity. This wasn't just betrayal. It was calculated. Strategic. Like I'd been part of a blueprint I didn't design. But now I had the tools. And it was time to redraw the plan. I sat with the notebook in my lap, flipping through the pages like a story written by someone I thought I knew. Every detail, every scribble, chipped away at the illusion of the woman I once loved. There were notes about my habits, when I left for work, how long I stayed out, even which days I seemed distracted enough not to notice. It wasn't just an affair. It was meticulous. Anna's name appeared more than I expected. Not just as a friend, but woven into Elena's plans like an accomplice. There were references to cover stories, shared locations, even coded phrases that meant nothing to anyone but them. I realized then this wasn't a mistake. This wasn't a slip in judgment. This was a project. And I'd been the blueprint. When Elena came home that evening, I was in the kitchen, casually stirring tea as if the world hadn't shifted beneath us. She smiled, tired from her appointment. Her bag slung lazily over her shoulder. She kissed me lightly, and I returned it without hesitation. "How was your day?" I asked, my voice calm. "Busy," she replied, pouring herself a glass of wine. "Meetings, errands. You know how it is." I nodded. I knew exactly how it was. That night, I held her closer than usual. My hand traced the curve of her back, my fingers resting where her heart should have been. She fell asleep quickly, her breath steady against my chest. But I didn't sleep. I stared at the ceiling, not with doubt this time, but with purpose. Because now I wasn't just a betrayed husband. I was an architect of her collapse. And the demolition had already begun. The next phase required patience. Revenge isn't about reaction. It's about control. The same way I calculated stress points in a structure, I identified Elena's vulnerabilities. And her weakest pillar wasn't her secret. It was her need to keep it hidden. I started with Anna. A casual message, friendly but curious. "Hey, haven't seen you around in a while. Elena mentioned you've been busy. Thought we could catch up sometime." She replied quickly, too quickly. "Oh, yeah, super busy. Work's been crazy. Hope you're both doing well." The cracks were already showing. I suggested meeting for coffee. She hesitated, made excuses, but eventually agreed. Guilt has a way of pulling people toward the very thing they should avoid. At the cafe, Anna was all nervous smiles and shaky hands, hiding behind polite conversation. I let her talk, nodding, pretending to be the oblivious husband. But every word she spoke, every darting glance, confirmed what I already knew. When the moment felt right, I leaned in slightly and said, "You know, I found Elena's notebook." Her face froze. The color drained faster than the coffee in her cup. "What notebook?" she asked, voice too light, too forced. I smiled, not answering, just letting the weight of those words hang in the air. Anna left quickly after that, muttering excuses. But it didn't matter. The seed was planted. The panic would grow. Back home, Elena was already restless, sensing something was off. She asked how my day was. "Ran into Anna," I said casually, watching her reaction like a scientist observing an experiment. She paused, just for a second, but I saw it, that flicker of fear behind her eyes. I kissed her forehead and smiled. The foundation was crumbling, and soon it would all collapse. After the meeting with Anna, The shift in Elena was immediate, subtle at first, like hairline fractures hidden beneath polished glass. She laughed less easily, her phone never left her side, and she'd glance at me with that cautious look, as if trying to read something in my eyes. She couldn't. I had become a perfect reflection of the man she thought I was. Calm, composed, loving. But beneath that surface, something darker had taken root. Days passed, and tension grew between us like a quiet hum, impossible to ignore. She'd ask questions she never cared about before. "How was your day? Did you do anything interesting?" I answered with a smile, always the same warmth, always the same charm. It wasn't time yet. Then came the next phase. I left my laptop open one evening, seemingly by accident, with a folder titled Project Elena visible on the screen. I went to the balcony, pretending to take a call, my back turned but my ears sharp. She took the bait. I heard the faint click of the mouse, the soft inhale when the folder opened. Inside were photos, ones I'd taken of her and him, time-stamped, clear as day. Screenshots of her messages, notes, details. Not everything, just enough. When I came back in, she was sitting stiffly, her face pale, trying to act normal. "Everything okay?" I asked, tilting my head slightly. She forced a smile. "Yeah, just tired." But her hands trembled slightly as she held her glass. That night, I lay awake beside her, listening to the restless shifts of her breathing. She thought she was still in control. But the game had already changed, and the next move was mine. The days that followed were a quiet war. No raised voices, no accusations. Just an invisible battlefield laid out between us. I watched her unravel in small ways. The nervous tapping of her fingers against the countertop, the distracted looks, the forced laughter. She was waiting for me to confront her. But I didn't. Instead, I did the unexpected. I planned a weekend getaway. Just the two of us. A cozy cabin by the lake, away from the city, away from distractions. I told her it was to reconnect, to find us again. She agreed, her smile tight, her eyes wary. The car ride was filled with light conversation, like nothing was wrong. But beneath the surface, tension twisted like a wire pulled too tight. She glanced at me often, her smile flickering like a weak signal. The cabin was beautiful, minimalist, isolated, surrounded by woods that swallowed sound. The perfect setting. That evening we sat by the fireplace, sipping wine. She was quieter than usual, her gaze distant. I broke the silence. "You know," I began softly, staring into the fire, "I've been thinking a lot about us." She shifted slightly, her grip on the glass tightening. "Do you ever feel like things aren't what they seem?" I continued, my tone gentle, as if I were speaking about the weather. She swallowed hard, forcing a laugh. "What do you mean?" I turned to face her then, really looking at her. The woman I thought I knew, now a stranger wrapped in familiar skin. "I think we've both been hiding things," I said. Her face paled, her lips parting slightly, searching for the right words. But I didn't give her the chance. I leaned in, my voice a whisper. "I know." The color drained from her face entirely. She opened her mouth to speak, but no sound came out, just the crackle of the fire between us. I stood up slowly, setting my glass down. "Let's not lie anymore, Elena." Her hands trembled as she placed her glass on the table, her eyes darting around the room like there was an escape route hidden somewhere. But there wasn't. Not here. Not anymore. Elena's eyes stayed fixed on me, wide and unblinking, her breath shallow. The firelight flickered across her face, casting shadows that made her look like someone else. A stranger wearing my wife's skin. She finally found her voice, soft and brittle. "Mark, I don't know what you mean." I smiled. Not the warm smile she was used to, but something colder, sharper. I reached into my bag and pulled out the small, black notebook, the one filled with her secrets. I placed it gently on the table between us, like laying down a final card in a losing hand. Her face drained of all color. "I read it," I said quietly, my voice steady. "Every word, every name." She didn't deny it, didn't try to explain. Instead, she sat there, frozen, her mind racing behind her panicked eyes. Why? I asked softly, genuinely curious. Why go through all the trouble? She opened her mouth, then closed it again, as if words were too heavy to carry. Finally, she whispered, "It wasn't supposed to be like this." I laughed. An empty sound that didn't reach my eyes. Oh, I know. It was supposed to be clean, controlled. Neat little lies tucked into neat little days. I leaned closer, my face inches from hers. But here's the thing about structures, Elena. They look strong until the foundation is compromised. Then they collapse. And you? I tapped the notebook lightly. You were the crack in mine. She reached out as if to touch my hand, her eyes softening with something that might have been guilt, or maybe just fear. I pulled my hand away. Standing up, I walked to the window, staring out at the dark woods surrounding us. "I brought us here for a reason," I said without turning around. "I wanted us to be somewhere quiet, somewhere no one would hear." I heard her sharp intake of breath, the scrape of the chair against the floor as she stood. But she didn't run. Not yet. She still thought there was room for redemption. She had no idea the blueprint for mercy was never part of my design. The room felt smaller now, the walls pressing in like the truth between us. Elena stood motionless, her breathing shallow, her eyes darting from me to the door, calculating distances, options. But this wasn't the city. There were no neighbors, no streetlights, no easy escapes. Just us, the dark woods outside, and the weight of everything she'd built on lies. I finally turned to face her. "You think this is about him, don't you?" I asked, stepping closer, slow and deliberate. "It's not." Her lips trembled, words struggling to form. "Mark, we can talk about this. Please." I let out a soft laugh, cold and hollow. "We are talking. I've been talking for months. You just weren't listening." She tried to step back, but the table stopped her. Her fingers brushed against the notebook, like it could somehow save her. I moved closer, my voice dropping to a whisper. "Do you know what's fascinating about structures under stress? They don't always collapse immediately. Sometimes they hold. Cracks spread quietly, unnoticed, until..." I snapped my fingers, sharp in the silent room. "It's too late." Her eyes filled with tears, but I felt nothing.
No pity. No sadness.
Just the cold satisfaction of control. I reached into my jacket and pulled out a small envelope, placing it beside the notebook. She hesitated before opening it. Inside were photos, not of her with him, but of her life dismantled piece by piece. Bank accounts drained. Her name removed from property deeds. Letters sent to her family, her employer, exposing everything. Her face crumpled as she flipped through them, her breath coming in short, broken gasps. "You didn't just cheat on me?" I whispered, leaning close enough to feel the tremor in her body. "You underestimated me." She dropped the envelope, her hands shaking. "Mark, please, we can fix this." I stepped back, tilting my head slightly. "Oh, Elena," I said softly, "I'm not here to fix anything. I'm here to finish it." Elena collapsed into the chair, her face buried in her trembling hands. The fire crackled beside us, indifferent to the unraveling of everything she thought she controlled. I watched her, the same way I'd watch a structure mid-demolition, knowing the collapse was inevitable, just waiting for gravity to do the rest. She mumbled something, her voice muffled. We can start over, Mark. We can fix this. I cut her off with a simple shake of my head. "You think this is about us?" I whispered, my voice low, calm. "This was never about us. This was about you." I walked over to the fireplace, picking up a small metal poker, turning it slowly in my hands. Not as a weapon, no, that wasn't the point. It was a symbol, a reminder that control isn't about force. It's about fear. She flinched as I approached, her eyes wide with terror now. Not guilt, not regret, just raw, unfiltered fear. And that's when I knew I'd won. I crouched beside her, setting the poker down gently on the floor. Then I leaned in, my face inches from hers. "I've already taken everything from you," I whispered. Your money, your reputation, your safety net. I smiled slightly. But that's not the part that will haunt you. She looked at me, confusion mixed with dread. I leaned closer. What will haunt you is knowing I let you live with it. Every day. Waking up, realizing everything you built is gone. And you're the one who destroyed it. Her tears flowed freely now, silent and desperate. But I felt nothing. I stood up, picked up my coat, and walked to the door. At the threshold, I paused, looking back one last time. Goodbye, Elena, I said softly. Enjoy the ruins. And then I left. I didn't slam the door. I didn't need to. The sound of her world collapsing was loud enough. The cold air outside felt cleaner, sharper, like I could finally breathe. The night was silent except for the faint rustle of wind through the trees, indifferent to the wreckage I left behind in that cabin. I didn't look back. I drove aimlessly for hours, letting the darkness swallow the miles behind me. No music, no distractions, just the hum of the engine and the rhythmic pulse of my own thoughts. Revenge wasn't what I expected. It didn't come with satisfaction, no surge of triumph. It was emptier than that, quieter, like standing in an abandoned building long after the walls had crumbled. When I finally stopped, it was near an overlook, a cliff that dropped into nothing but shadows. I stood there for a long time, staring out at the vast emptiness, feeling both lighter and heavier all at once. I thought of Elena, alone in that cabin, surrounded by the echoes of what used to be her life. I imagined her sitting there, realizing no one was coming to save her. Not me, not Anna, not anyone. And that was the true punishment. Not the loss of money or status, but the silence that followed. The realization that everything she had, everything she'd built, was gone because of her own choices. I reached into my pocket, pulling out the last photo I'd taken. Not of her, not of him. Just the empty bed where I used to sleep beside her. A space that once felt warm, now frozen in time. I tore it in half, letting the pieces scatter in the wind. Then I got back in the car and drove away, not from her, but from the man I used to be. Weeks passed, then months. Time moved differently after everything was gone, like the ticking of a clock in an empty room. Louder, slower, but meaningless. I didn't hear from Elena. I didn't expect to. She had nothing left to say. I returned to the city, to the life that once felt familiar, though now it felt like walking through a house that had been abandoned long before I left. My apartment was sterile, clean lines, minimalist decor, the kind of space designed to impress but never truly lived in. Fit me better now. Work became my refuge. Drafting buildings, designing flawless structures with foundations I could trust. Unlike people, buildings don't lie. They don't betray. They stand or they fall, and if they fall, it's because of a mistake you can trace, a flaw you can fix. But people are different. I often found myself staring out of my office window, watching the city breathe below me. Thousands of lives, all tangled in secrets and stories, most of them thinking they were safe inside their illusions. I wondered where she was, if she still woke up every day feeling the weight of her choices. If the silence I left behind haunted her like an echo she couldn't escape. But I didn't miss her. I missed the version of her that never existed. One evening, I found myself back at the same overlook, standing where I had let go of the last photo. The wind was colder now, sharper, but I didn't feel it the same way. I realized then, revenge doesn't heal. It doesn't fill the empty spaces. It just carves them deeper. But sometimes emptiness is better. It's honest. I left the overlook without looking back. And this time I didn't feel like something was missing, because it wasn't.